The grainy footage flickered, a digital ghost dancing across a dimly lit screen. Shadows writhed in the oppressive gloom, giving fleeting form to what appeared to be the skeletal remains of an abandoned shopping mall. Dust motes, caught in the beam of a weak flashlight, spun like microscopic galaxies, illuminating rusted escalators and forgotten mannequins slumped in unnatural poses. Then, a movement. Not a subtle shift, but a deliberate, hulking mass detaching itself from the deeper shadows, lurching with an unsettling, almost human gait. It was enormous, dark, and undeniably out of place. The camera, handheld and unsteady, struggled to track it, the lens flaring momentarily before plunging back into the near-total darkness. A quiet, raspy breath could be heard, a sound that seemed to suck the very air from the room, followed by the sickening crunch of something heavy impacting concrete. Just as the figure began to turn, its form still largely obscured, a sudden, blood-curdling scream tore through the silence, raw and primal, cutting off abruptly as the footage dissolved into static. This chilling clip, uploaded anonymously to a forgotten corner of the internet, ignited a firestorm of speculation, a terrifying glimpse into something that defied explanation. For Alex, such enigmas were not just a hobby. They were a calling. An urban explorer by passion, an amateur videographer by trade, he had carved a niche for himself documenting the decaying arteries of forgotten America. From crumbling industrial complexes in Detroit to overgrown ghost towns in the Nevada desert, his lens captured the beauty and desolation, the stories whispered by derelict structures. He was meticulous, some might say obsessive, about his gear. An array of high-definition cameras, drones, motion sensors, and an arsenal of lighting equipment that could turn the darkest abyss into a film set. But beyond the technical prowess, Alex possessed an insatiable thirst for content that pushed boundaries, for the unique narratives hidden within the skeletons of human endeavor. He wasn't after cheap thrills. He sought the profound, the unsettling, the truly unexplainable. It was this relentless pursuit that led him to whispers emanating from rural Oregon, rumors of a place called Westwood Plaza Mall. Once a bustling hub of commerce, it had become a silent monolith, abandoned for decades after a string of baffling incidents and a swift, unexplained economic collapse in the surrounding area. The mall wasn't just deserted, it was infamous. Local legends, passed down through generations, spoke of a colossal, ape-like creature that roamed the dense forests bordering the mall's property. They called it the Forest Giant, a bipedal cryptid with immense strength and eyes that glowed in the darkest night. Initially, Alex dismissed it as quaint folklore, the kind of local color that always accompanied truly isolated places. But then he started hearing about the sounds, guttural roars and heavy thuds that echoed from within the decaying structure, reported by daring teenagers and even a few skeptical hunters who ventured too close. The stories became more specific, describing inexplicable damage to the mall's perimeter, vast ragged tears in sheet metal that no human could inflict, and an unsettling silence that descended upon the surrounding woods whenever the sounds from the mall began. He spent weeks poring over old news clippings, local forums, and obscure cryptozoology blogs. The deeper he delved, the more an unsettling pattern emerged. Eyewitness accounts, often dismissed as drunken ramblings, began to coalesce into a disturbing narrative. Large, unexplained tracks found near the mall's entrances, vanishing domestic animals from nearby farms, a palpable sense of dread described by anyone who dared to linger near the perimeter after dusk. Warnings, both subtle and overt, reached him through various channels. "Stay away from Westwood, son," an old logger's gravelly voice warned him over the phone. There's things in there that don't want to be found. Even his online community, usually eager for his next daring adventure, expressed an unusual degree of trepidation. "Are you sure about this one, Alex?" read one comment. "That place has a bad vibe, even from the pictures." But the warnings, rather than deterring him, only fueled Alex's resolve. The amateur footage, the localized legends, the consistent pattern of strange occurrences. It all coalesced into a compelling, irresistible narrative. This wasn't just another forgotten building. It was a potential nexus for something truly extraordinary. His equipment was checked, batteries charged, and an extensive emergency kit packed. The thirst for unique content, coupled with a deep-seated curiosity about the unexplained, was a powerful motivator. He knew the risks were higher than usual, the warnings more dire, but the potential reward, capturing undeniable proof of a creature relegated to myth, outweighed the fear. The Westwood Plaza Mall beckoned, a dark, crumbling monument to both forgotten commerce and whispered legends, and Alex, armed with his cameras and an unshakable determination, was about to answer its call. Before we delve deeper into Alex's perilous journey, a journey that would challenge his sanity and redefine his understanding of reality, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on more spine-chilling true stories like this one. Your support helps us bring you these incredible, often terrifying, real-life encounters from the darkest corners of our world. Alex pushed through the rusted, mangled security gate, the metal screeching in protest, as if the mall itself was groaning a warning. The air inside Westwood Plaza Mall was thick with the scent of decay, a cocktail of mildew, dust, and something indescribably metallic, like old blood. Sunlight, fractured and weak, pierced through gaping holes in the ceiling and shattered skylights, casting long skeletal shadows across the once vibrant concourses. Graffiti, a chaotic canvas of spray-painted rebellion, adorned every available surface, but even that felt ancient, faded by time and neglect. Alex, ever the professional, clicked on his helmet-mounted camera, its red recording light a tiny sentinel in the encroaching gloom. He moved with a practiced fluidity, his hands deftly managing his primary camera, capturing the slow, relentless reclamation of this man-made structure by nature and time. Every few steps, his camera zoomed in on a specific detail, a collapsed section of ceiling where rebar hung like twisted vines, a fountain filled not with water, but with broken ceramic tiles and refuse, or a row of skeletal mannequins, their plastic bodies contorted in grotesque poses within the shell of what was once a haute couture boutique. The silence was profound, broken only by the crunch of debris under his boots and the soft whir of his camera's lens. He narrated softly into his microphone, his voice a hushed counterpoint to the mall's oppressive quiet, detailing the rapid abandonment, the telltale signs of a place left to rot. He found a child's shoe, perfectly preserved in a thick layer of dust, an unsettling relic of a hurried departure, a forgotten life. As he ventured deeper into what was once the main food court, the dust grew thicker, undisturbed, a pristine canvas. That's when he saw them, not immediately, but after turning a corner where a fast food counter lay in ruins, its stainless steel counters now dull and pitted. There, in the undisturbed powdering of fine silt that coated the floor, were impressions. Large, incredibly large, and distinctly not human. They were wider, longer, with a discernible toe splay that suggested immense weight. He knelt, his camera focusing automatically, capturing every detail of the anomalous imprints. He ran his gloved finger along one, feeling the subtle indentation. These weren't animal tracks he recognized, nor were they consistent with any known human footwear. A shiver, not of cold, but of something primal, snaked down his spine. Then, from somewhere deep within the bowels of the abandoned complex, a sound echoed. It wasn't the creak of settling metal or the whisper of wind through broken windows. It was guttural, a low, throaty rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very concrete beneath him. He froze, his head cocked, listening intently. The sound lasted only a few seconds, then died away, leaving an even more profound silence in its wake. He dismissed it for a moment, as a trick of the acoustics or a structural groan. This place was old, decaying. Strange noises were to be expected. Still, the hairs on his neck stood on end. He continued his exploration, but with a heightened sense of awareness, his eyes darting more frequently into the shadowed recesses of the deserted stores. Later, back in his temporary base camp, a discreetly parked reinforced RV a few miles from the mall, Alex reviewed the day's footage. He fast-forwarded through hours of meticulous documentation, pausing occasionally to re-examine a particularly striking image of decay. It was then, while reviewing the helmet cam footage from earlier, that he noticed it. A fleeting, almost imperceptible movement in the periphery of a shot, a shadow, deeper than the others, that seemed to detach itself from the wall and then melt back into it. He rewound, played it again, frame by agonizing frame. There, for a split second, a form, indistinct but undeniably large and bipedal, passed behind a broken display case. He hadn't seen it, hadn't registered it consciously at the time. His heart hammered in his chest. The next day, armed with this newfound disquiet, he returned to the mall, his senses hyper-alert. He revisited the area where he'd seen the shadow. Near the back entrance of what used to be a large department store, he found it. A metal support beam, scarred with deep, parallel gouges. Not the shallow scratches of human vandalism, but deep, powerful gashes, as if an enormous claw had raked across the solid steel. He compared them to the size of his own hand, to the multi-tool clipped to his belt. The marks were immense. And nearby, tucked into a pile of rotting insulation, he noticed something else. Tattered scraps of fabric. Not human clothing. This material was coarse, dark, fibrous, and unlike anything he had ever seen. It felt almost organic, like matted hair, but too thick, too strong. This ruled out human vandals, decisively. A profound sense of unease settled over Alex. The feeling of being watched intensified, a persistent pressure on the back of his neck, a prickling sensation that made him constantly scan the empty hallways. He would spin around, convinced he'd heard a faint rustle, seen a shift in the shadows, only to find nothing. The mall, once merely an object of urban exploration, now felt like an enormous silent predator, its vast spaces echoing with unseen eyes. His fascination began to curdle into a potent blend of fear and obsessive curiosity. Back at his RV that night, he devoured every piece of local folklore he could find about the Westwood area. The vague rumors of strange occurrences from the initial research now coalesced into a chilling pattern. Old newspaper clippings, faded forum posts, and even obscure local history books spoke of a forest giant, a wild man of the woods, an ape-like creature that had haunted the vast, dense forests surrounding the town for generations. The accounts described something massive, powerful, and notoriously elusive. Most unsettling were the tales that hinted at its intelligence, its ability to move unseen, to observe without being observed. And then there were the occasional mentions of it, venturing into abandoned structures. drawn by shelter or curiosity, or perhaps something more sinister. Alex stared at the flickering screen, the words blurring, a cold dread seeping into his bones. He wasn't alone in that mall, and whatever was with him had been there for a very, very long time. The unsettling quiet that followed Alex's initial discoveries, rather than offering solace, only intensified his anxiety. He knew something was lurking within the shadowy expanse of Westwood Plaza, and he was determined to prove it. Driven by a volatile mix of creeping dread and journalistic zeal, Alex moved with newfound purpose, transforming from a mere documentarian of decay into a hunter of the unknown. He methodically deployed his motion-activated cameras, placing them strategically in areas where the enormous footprints had been most concentrated, near the torn fabric, and along the routes he suspected the creature might traverse. Each placement was a calculated gamble, hoping to capture the phantom in its natural element. As an additional lure, he left small piles of food scraps near the most prominent trackways. Discarded sandwiches, some dried fruit, anything that might appeal to an omnivorous diet, an offering to the unseen, a crude form of bait. A period of unnerving stillness descended upon the mall. Days bled into one another, without a definitive sighting, only the oppressive weight of the silence. It was a silence deeper than mere abandonment, a pervasive quiet that seemed to absorb all sound, muffling even his own footsteps. Alex's nerves frayed under its constant pressure. Each creak of the crumbling structure, each distant rustle, sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. He would return to check his camera traps, only to find the bait gone, vanished without a trace, leaving only disturbed dust and an intensifying sense of being toyed with. Then came the chilling discovery. One of his most covertly placed remote cameras, nestled behind a stack of rusted shopping carts in a deep corner of the food court, lay smashed beyond repair. The lens was shattered, the casing cracked, and most disturbingly, the memory card, the very heart of the device, was missing. It wasn't merely broken. It had been deliberately destroyed, and its vital information stolen. A cold dread settled in his stomach, a realization that whatever he was dealing with wasn't just an animal. It possessed a rudimentary, terrifying intelligence. Despite the loss and the escalating fear, hope flickered. One camera, placed high on a support pillar overlooking the vast central atrium, had survived. With trembling hands, Alex retrieved the footage, his breath catching in his throat as the playback began. The video was dark, grainy, punctuated by the occasional flash of movement triggered by the motion sensor. He fast-forwarded through hours of empty corridors and swaying dust motes, his eyes straining, until suddenly, there it was. A fleeting, blurred image. A massive, dark shape, indistinct yet undeniably huge, moved with incredible speed from one shadowed archway to another, crossing the distant corridor in a fraction of a second. It was too fast, too large, too powerful to be human. The footage was brief, pixelated, far from conclusive proof for a skeptical world. But for Alex, it was everything. It was confirmation. His suspicions were not products of an overactive imagination. Something truly colossal, something beyond explanation lurked within the mall's desolate halls. The brief glimpse, though indistinct, sent shivers down his spine, a primal confirmation of the terrifying reality he now faced. The psychological toll began to manifest in Alex's every waking moment, and even in his fitful sleep. The constant feeling of being scrutinized, the knowledge that an unseen, intelligent entity was aware of his presence, gnawed at his resolve. His nights were plagued by fragmented, stress-induced dreams, where vast shadows loomed and guttural roars echoed endlessly. Sleep deprivation became a constant companion, leaving him haggard, his eyes bloodshot, his movements sluggish. He started flinching at unexpected sounds, his heart rate accelerating at the slightest disturbance. Paranoia settled in like a suffocating blanket. Every dark corner, a potential hiding spot. Every distant sound a sign of imminent danger. He found himself constantly checking behind him, peering into the gloom, a cold sweat often dampening his brow. The mall, once a thrilling landscape for urban exploration, now felt like a predatory organism, slowly closing its jaws around him. He began to question his own sanity, the wisdom of embarking on this solitary quest. Had his thirst for unique content blinded him to the obvious dangers? The sheer audacity of entering such a place alone, armed with nothing but cameras and a flashlight, now seemed like an act of profound folly. The weight of his isolation pressed down on him, amplifying every fear, every doubt. The creature's presence was palpable, an invisible force that dominated the atmosphere, subtly altering the mall's desolate charm into a sinister trap. He tried to rationalize, to find scientific explanations for the creature's intelligence, its apparent stealth, but his mind kept circling back to the local legends, the whispers of a forest giant whose cunning was as fearsome as its size. The urban explorer was no longer observing. He was being observed. The hunter had become the hunted, and the realization was slowly, chillingly, beginning to break him. The silence, the missing memory card, the blurred footage, all served to tighten the psychological noose around his neck, pushing him to the brink of his endurance. The psychological strain, coupled with the undeniable evidence of the creature's massive presence, finally pushed Alex to a critical decision point. This was no longer about capturing footage for a YouTube channel. It was about self-preservation. Overwhelmed by the constant surveillance and the gnawing fear, Alex decided a strategic retreat was his only option. He needed to gather his remaining gear, salvage what footage he could, and get out of the mall. The plan was to regroup, perhaps return with backup, or at the very least, reevaluate his approach with more advanced equipment and a clearer head. He began systematically collecting his cameras, his spare batteries, the dwindling supply of water, every item suddenly feeling heavy with the weight of his predicament. His movements were deliberate, cautious, every rustle of debris underfoot sounding like a thunderclap in the oppressive silence. He maintained a hyper-awareness of his surroundings, his head swiveling constantly, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom, searching for any sign of movement, any shadow that seemed too deep. The initial thrill of exploration had long since evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating fear that dictated every action. His exit strategy focused on a less-used service entrance he had noticed on his initial reconnaissance. It was a metal door, partially obscured by overgrown bushes on the outside, and relatively free of the major debris that blocked the main entrances. He theorized it would be less likely to be monitored by the creature, less obvious as an escape route. Navigating the labyrinthine service corridors, which were even darker and more dilapidated than the main concourses, Alex felt a flicker of hope. He was so close. The air grew slightly cooler, a hint of outside air seeping in, invigorating him with a surge of adrenaline. But as he rounded what he thought was the final bend, his heart sank into his stomach. The exit route was no longer an option. A massive pile of rubble, twisted metal, and shattered concrete now completely blocked the service door, a fresh collapse that wasn't there before. It looked deliberate, too neat to be a natural settling of the structure. The debris was not merely piled, it seemed to be jammed and wedged, sealing the passage with an almost intelligent precision. This was not a chance occurrence. It was a blockade. He was trapped. A sudden, deafening creak echoed from directly above him, followed by a shower of dust and small rocks. Alex instinctively recoiled, stumbling backward just as a large section of the ceiling, a heavy concrete slab riddled with rebar, crashed down precisely where he had been standing moments before. The impact sent vibrations through the floor, a cloud of concrete dust billowing around him, stinging his eyes. He coughed, his throat raw, his breath catching in his chest. It missed him by mere inches. The near-fatal incident wasn't accidental. The collapse felt too precise, too targeted. It was then, amidst the lingering dust and the terrifying silence that followed, that a chilling realization washed over him. A cold, hard truth that solidified all his fragmented fears. Alex connected the dots with horrifying clarity. The smashed camera, not just broken, but completely missing its memory card. The strategically consumed bait, the suddenly blocked exits, and now this targeted ceiling collapse. It wasn't just a coincidence or the mall's natural decay. The creature wasn't merely present, it was aware of him, tracking him, anticipating his moves. And more than that, it was actively manipulating his environment, hurting him. The creature's actions were not random acts of a wild animal. They demonstrated a chilling level of intelligence and intent. It was playing a game, and Alex was the reluctant pawn. It had allowed him to think he was searching, allowed him to believe he was documenting, only to tighten the net around him. The bait was a test of his presence, the smashed camera a warning, the blocked exits a physical confinement, and the ceiling collapse a direct threat, a demonstration of its power and control. The creature seemed to be guiding him, pushing him deeper into its territory, into the heart of the abandoned mall, away from any potential escape routes. This was not a passive encounter. It was an active, malevolent pursuit. The thought sent a fresh wave of terror coursing through his veins, the hairs on his arms standing on end. He now understood the immense danger he was truly in. This was no longer just a research expedition, a thrilling urban exploration, or a quest for viral content. This was a survival situation, a life-or-death scenario playing out in the decaying corridors of a forgotten palace of consumerism. His cameras, his meticulous notes, his urban explorer persona, all melted away, replaced by the primitive instinct to survive. The creature wasn't just a cryptid. It was a formidable, intelligent predator, and Alex was its prey. Every shadow now seemed to hold its breath, every creak and groan of the old building amplified, imbued with a sinister intent. The silence was no longer empty. It was pregnant with anticipation, the quiet hum of a hunter patiently waiting for its moment. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat signaling the dawning of his new, terrifying reality. He had to find a way out, and fast before the game the creature was playing turned fatal. The stakes had been raised exponentially, and Alex knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that his life depended on his next move. A sudden, sharp crack echoed from the far end of the corridor, sending a jolt of pure terror through Alex's exhausted body. It was distinct, heavy, deliberate, not the settling of the old structure, nor the groan of stressed metal. This was the sound of something immense moving with purpose, its weight compressing the decaying floorboards. The footsteps began again, closer this time, each thudding impact vibrating through the very soles of his worn boots. They were slow, almost rhythmic, a predatory march that left no doubt of intent. The creature was no longer merely present, it was hunting. Alex's breath hitched in his throat, a cold knot of dread tightening in his stomach. He didn't need to see it to know it was coming. Every instinct screamed at him to run. He bolted, flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive gloom, his camera still clutched tightly in his hand, instinctively recording the unfolding nightmare. The maze of abandoned stores became his desperate escape route. Each storefront a potential hiding place. Each darkened aisle a fleeting moment of cover. He scrambled over fallen mannequins, slid across slick, dust-covered linoleum, his heart hammering against his ribs with a frantic, deafening rhythm. The sound of his own ragged breathing filled his ears, a counterpoint to the relentless, heavy footsteps that now quickened their pace behind him. He risked a glance over his shoulder, his night vision camera momentarily illuminating a fleeting, hulking silhouette at the far end of the mall's main atrium. It was impossibly large, moving with a fluid, terrifying grace that belied its immense size. The creature was gaining. Panic, ice-cold and debilitating, threatened to consume him, but a deeper, more primal survival instinct took hold, forcing his legs to pump harder, faster. He pushed himself to the absolute limits of his physical endurance, every muscle screaming in protest, every nerve ending firing with desperate urgency. The creature's immense power became horrifyingly evident. He heard a sickening crunch, a splintering of wood and tearing of metal, barely seconds after he had squeezed through a narrow opening between two collapsed shelving units. A section of heavy industrial shelving, designed to hold thousands of pounds, was rent from its moorings, crumpled like paper by an unseen, devastating force. He didn't see the impact, but the sound was unmistakable, the sheer destructive capability of whatever pursued him, chilling him to the bone. Another sound followed, a low, guttural growl that reverberated through the vast, empty space. A sound of frustration, a sound of pure, predatory menace. Alex had several heart-stopping near misses, each one a stark reminder of his fragility. He ducked under a collapsed support beam just as a massive, fur-covered arm smashed through the space where his head had been an instant before, sending splintered concrete raining down. He scrambled around a display stand, pushing it over to create a momentary obstruction, and heard the creature simply smash through it, the sound of shattered glass and twisted metal echoing ominously. There was no finesse, no attempt at stealth from the creature now, only raw, unadulterated power and relentless pursuit. Despite the all-consuming panic, Alex's ingrained journalistic instinct, that insatiable thirst for proof, kept his camera rolling. The tiny red light on the device was a beacon of his desperate hope, a silent testament to the harrowing events unfolding around him. In fleeting glances, captured on the small screen, he saw it. Not just a blurred shape, but glimpses of something truly monstrous. Massive, fur-covered limbs, moving with incredible speed. Eyes, reflecting the camera's infrared light, glowed with an eerie, intelligent intensity from within the shadows, sometimes amber, sometimes a piercing red. A guttural roar, deep and resonant, ripped through the air, shaking the very dust from the crumbling ceiling. He captured the creature's impossible agility, its ability to navigate the debris-strewn environment with terrifying ease, debunking every common myth of a slow, lumbering beast. This was a sophisticated hunter, powerful beyond measure, and it was playing a deadly game of cat and mouse. Every brief, terrifying glimpse, every primal sound was being recorded, a chilling testament to his ordeal, a record of something that shouldn't exist. Desperate measures became his only recourse. Alex, driven by a primal need for self-preservation, began to actively use the environment to slow down his relentless pursuer. He veered sharply into an old electronics section, desperately pushing over display cases filled with vintage, shattered electronics, creating a cascading avalanche of plastic and glass. The crash was tremendous, but the footsteps behind him barely faltered. He then stumbled into what must have been an old department store, its aisles still filled with skeletal clothing racks and dusty, forgotten mannequins. He grabbed a heavy metal shelving unit, its shelves surprisingly intact, and with a desperate surge of adrenaline, heaved it over, sending a shower of rusted bolts and warped metal crashing to the floor. The creature paused for a split second, a low growl of annoyance rumbling in its chest, before it simply stepped over the obstruction, its immense weight crushing the metal beneath its foot without effort. He then saw a collection of old, heavy-duty shopping trolleys, rusted, and piled haphazardly near what was once a loading bay. With a strength born of pure terror, Alex began pushing them, one after another, into the path of the approaching creature, creating a cacophony of scraping metal and clattering wheels. The tactic only momentarily impeded its relentless pursuit. He heard it, a powerful, swift movement, and then the sound of twisted metal, as if the trolleys were mere toys to be swatted aside. The creature was undeterred, its presence a cold, palpable weight in the air, its breathing now audible, a ragged, heavy inhale and exhale that sounded disturbingly close. He could almost feel its immense presence, the heat radiating from its massive body, the sheer force of its will to capture him. The chase intensified, every turn, every corner, a gamble, every fleeting shadow a potential trap. He was running on fumes, his body aching, his mind screaming for respite, but the relentless, primal fear of capture fueled his flight. The crushing weight of his near-fatal encounter, the psychological torment, and the raw, guttural fear had coalesced into a singular, undeniable truth. He needed to get out, but as he had learned, escape was not a simple matter of walking away. The mall, or rather its dominant inhabitant, had other plans. His last-ditch effort to find an unblocked service exit had failed, forcing him into a deeper, more treacherous section of the decaying complex. The low growls, the heavy thuds, the distinct feeling of being herded, all painted a grim picture. This creature was not merely reacting, it was orchestrating a terrifying game of cat and mouse, and Alex was unequivocally the mouse. He found himself stumbling into the cavernous, eerie expanse of what must have once been the mall's anchor department store. Dust motes danced in the sparse beams of light, piercing through broken skylights, illuminating ghostly racks and forgotten display cases. The air hung stagnant, thick with the scent of decay and something else, something primal and unsettling. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to keep moving, but his tired muscles protested, and he knew a direct flight was futile against an adversary of such speed and power. His only chance lay in evasion, in finding a place to hide, to reassess, to regain some semblance of control. His eyes darted around the cavernous space, seeking refuge. Amidst the debris and forgotten merchandise, a forgotten display caught his attention. A haphazard stack of mannequins, their featureless faces staring blankly into the gloom. It was a desperate choice, far from ideal, but it offered a momentary illusion of concealment. He slipped behind them, crouching low, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The plastic limbs, some broken, some askew, formed a fragile, eerie barrier. He gripped his camera, its small red light a beacon of defiant documentation in the suffocating darkness, pointing it outwards, hoping to capture whatever horror was about to unfold. Then the air grew heavy, thick with an unseen presence. A shadow, larger and deeper than any cast by the broken architecture, stretched across the cracked linoleum floor, preceding the creature's arrival. It moved with a slow, deliberate cadence, each heavy thud resonating through the concrete, a bass drum announcing his inevitable doom. The creature entered the department store, its immense form momentarily silhouetted against a distant sliver of light from the main concourse. It was a monolith of shadow and muscle, its contours barely discernible in the ambient gloom. The Bigfoot paused, almost imperceptibly, its massive head turning slowly from side to side, sniffing the air, its nostrils flaring. The sound was subtle, a soft, almost imperceptible intake of breath, yet it sent a shiver down Alex's spine. It moved deliberately, not in a frantic search, but with an intelligent, almost calculated pace, as if it already knew where he was, merely confirming its suspicions. Its heavy, dark fur seemed to absorb what little light there was, rendering it an even more intimidating and shadowy figure. Each ponderous step brought it closer to Alex's hiding spot, the floorboards groaning under its immense weight. Then, in a moment that would forever be seared into Alex's memory, a terrifying, silent understanding passed between predator and prey. The creature's head slowly angled, its eyes, two pinpricks of intense glowing amber in the darkness, locked onto the tiny, almost imperceptible lens of Alex's hidden camera. There was no doubt it had pinpointed the source of the observation. It wasn't looking around the mannequins. It was looking at the camera, directly, unflinchingly. A primal intelligence, cold and calculating, shimmered within those luminous eyes. There was a mixture of curiosity, a raw, territorial possessiveness, and a nascent, terrifying menace that stole Alex's breath. It saw him. It knew he was there, capturing its image. A terrifying moment of silence stretched, taut and agonizing. The creature stood perfectly still, its massive form dominating the space, a living shadow imbued with an unsettling sentience. Its gaze held Alex captive, even through the lens, a direct challenge, an unspoken question. This was no mindless beast. It was an aware entity, capable of recognizing a threat, of understanding an intrusion. The silent stare lasted for what felt like an eternity, a profound and horrifying connection forged in a desolate, forgotten corner of the world. Every muscle in Alex's body screamed for him to flee, but he remained frozen, a deer caught in an impossible, terrifying headlight. The air crackled with an unspoken tension, the entire abandoned mall seeming to hold its breath. Then, with an unnerving slowness that belied its earlier speed, the creature began to move. It slowly raised one massive clawed hand, its fingers thick as branches, reaching towards the camera. Its motion was not immediately aggressive, not a violent lunge, but a deliberate, almost inquisitive gesture, as if it were examining its reflection in the lens, or perhaps acknowledging the presence of the device itself. For a fleeting second, a flicker of something almost thoughtful crossed its ancient, bestial face. Alex's mind raced, trying to decipher its intent. Was it curiosity? A warning? A prelude to destruction? Before he could process the full implications of this chilling, deliberate gesture, the creature's immense hand, with a sudden, violent swipe, obliterated the lens, sending a shower of plastic and metal shards flying into the darkness. The world, as seen through the camera, plunged into instant, absolute blackness. The camera, Alex's last fragile link to documenting the impossible, went utterly black, a crushing silence visually replacing the terrifying image. But the audio, mercifully, persisted. A deafening, metallic crash reverberated through the empty space, the sound of the creature's immense strength shattering the camera into oblivion. Simultaneously, A ragged, involuntary cry of alarm ripped from Alex's throat. A raw gasp of pure terror, and a sharp intake of breath as shards of plastic and metal rained down around him. He heard a sickening crunch, then the harsh scrape of something heavy being dragged across the floor as he instinctively recoiled, his body protesting the sudden violent impact. The sound of frantic, desperate movement followed, a chaotic scramble as Alex, adrenaline surging, tried to untangle himself from the pile of mannequins he'd been hiding behind. His legs, stiff from fear and prolonged stillness, were slow to respond. But the instinct for survival was a far more powerful motivator than any physical impediment. A primeval, guttural roar then tore through the darkness, a sound so deep and resonant it vibrated through Alex's very bones. It wasn't the sound of triumph, but something else entirely. A mixture of frustration, perhaps a warning, or even a challenge. It was the sound of a beast whose intentions had been thwarted, whose privacy had been violated, now fully enraged. The direct hit on the camera, Alex realized with a terrifying clarity, had momentarily distracted the creature. That precious fraction of a second, the creature's fury focused on the shattered lens was his only chance. He lunged, pushing off from the fragmented plastic bodies, his injured legs screaming in protest. But he ignored the pain, his mind solely focused on escape. He burst from his flimsy cover, a dark, fleeting shape darting into the deeper shadows of the department store. The creature's terrifying roar still echoing behind him, a furious declaration of continued pursuit. Alex managed to break free from his hiding spot, his movements clumsy but propelled by an almost supernatural burst of adrenaline. He stumbled, catching himself on a fallen display rack, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He was injured, a sharp, searing pain in his side where some debris must have struck him, and a new ache blooming in his ankle, but it wasn't critical. Not yet. He could still move, still run, still fight for his life. The creature, having effectively destroyed the source of its perceived intrusion, now seemed to redirect its attention to Alex himself. He heard the heavy, deliberate thud of its footsteps resuming, closer now, faster, no longer exploratory, but overtly aggressive. Each echoing step was a hammer blow against the silence, a terrifying countdown to his potential capture. He scrambled blindly, his hands outstretched, feeling for walls, for anything that could guide him through the oppressive darkness. He raced towards what he desperately hoped was the main entrance, a place he remembered from his initial optimistic exploration. His memory, however, was now a jumbled mess of fear and disorientation. Every turn looked the same, every dark corridor, a potential dead end. He could hear the creature in close pursuit, its heavy footsteps now a rhythmic, terrifying drumbeat behind him. He could almost feel its immense presence, the guttural breathing echoing through the vast, empty space of the mall, a primal sound that spoke of raw power and relentless determination. His lungs burned, his throat raw, but he forced himself onward, pushing past the pain, past the fatigue, driven by the singular, overwhelming need to survive. The air around him suddenly felt colder, a chilling premonition of what lay just steps behind him, a massive, ancient horror intent on silencing him forever. He burst through a dilapidated doorway, sending a shower of crumbling plaster to the floor, and found himself in what appeared to be one of the main concourses. It was still impossibly dark, but in the distance, a faint, almost imperceptible glimmer of light pierced the oppressive gloom. It was a beacon, a lifeline, a desperate, shimmering promise of escape. A partially open shattered window or a dislodged service door, he couldn't tell, but it was there. It was his potential exit, his one chance to break free from this nightmarish labyrinth. A surge of desperate hope, potent and intoxicating, coursed through his veins, momentarily eclipsing the fear and the pain. He pushed through debris and obstacles with newfound adrenaline, vaulting over overturned planters, dodging fallen mannequins, his every movement a testament to the sheer will to live. The light seemed to pull him forward, a tiny glowing pinprick against the vast consuming darkness of the abandoned mall and the relentless horror chasing him. He could almost taste the night air, feel the freedom. Almost. The creature was still behind him, its breathing now a loud, rasping bellows, its massive shadow stretching and shrinking with every broken light fixture. A terrifying dance of pursuit and escape. The camera's feed died, a jarring, absolute blackness that replaced the terrifying image of the creature's immense hand. But the audio continued, a raw, unfiltered stream of the mall's terrifying interior. A deafening crash ripped through the silence, the sound of the camera being utterly demolished, followed by Alex's involuntary cry of alarm, a strangled gasp escaping his lips. He scrambled backwards, his body recoiling from the force of the impact, every instinct screaming for survival. Then came the creature's roar, a guttural, earth-shaking sound that was less an expression of aggression and more one of frustrated warning, an enraged declaration of its territory, its voice a thunderclap echoing through the cavernous space. The sudden, violent termination of the camera feed, combined with the creature's momentary confusion or anger, provided Alex with the fractional window he desperately needed. He scrambled from his hiding spot behind the shattered mannequins, his movements clumsy but fueled by a primal surge of adrenaline. Pain shot through his side, a jagged shard of plastic embedded just beneath his ribs, a memento of the creature's swipe. But there was no time for assessment, no luxury for pain. He pushed through the debris, navigating the ruins of the department store by instinct, his heart hammering against his ribs. He didn't know where he was going, only that it had to be away. He sprinted, a desperate, breathless dash through the labyrinthine corridors of the abandoned mall. The creature's heavy footsteps resumed, closer now, more deliberate, a relentless pursuit. Each thud vibrated through the decaying floor, each guttural breath of the beast echoing with terrifying clarity, a constant chilling reminder of the hunter on his heels. He could hear it smashing through obstacles, tearing through shelves, its immense power a terrifying counterpoint to his own fragile humanity. He was a mouse in a maze, and the cat was large, powerful, and very, very close. Ahead, through a shattered expanse of what might have once been a skylight, or a large display window, Alex saw it. A faint, ethereal glow. It wasn't the artificial, flickering light of the mall, but the soft, undeniable promise of dawn. The outside world? Hope. He pushed harder, his lungs burning, his muscles screaming in protest. Debris, fallen signs, and display racks became both obstacles and opportunities. He vaulted over a collapsed clothing stand, slid under a half-hanging fluorescent fixture, his desperate momentum barely carrying him forward. The light grew stronger, painting the dust motes in the air with a soft, grayish luminescence. With one final, Herculean surge of adrenaline, Alex stumbled, and then burst through what remained of a loading dock door, crashing out into the cool, damp morning air. The roar from inside the mall was immediate, a thunderous declaration of defeat and territorial rage, but it was behind him. He didn't look back. He didn't dare. He just ran, his body a symphony of aches and scrapes, his mind a jumble of shock and disbelief. The gray light of pre-dawn was a balm to his terrified soul. He kept running until he saw his beat-up SUV, a familiar, comforting sight in the desolate landscape. He fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking so violently he almost dropped them. He slammed the door shut, started the engine with a frantic turn, and peeled away from the cursed mall, leaving the roaring echoes and the terrifying shadows behind. The drive was a blur, the adrenaline slowly receding, replaced by a profound, bone-deep shock. He drove until the sun was high, until the memory of the mall was a distant speck in his rearview mirror. Back in the relative safety of his temporary lodging, Alex stared at the surviving camera, the one he had held directly, its internal memory intact despite the harrowing escape. He knew what he had to do. With trembling fingers, he downloaded the footage. The video played, a chilling first-person account of horror. The blurred shapes, the guttural sounds, the increasing panic in his own breathing. And then, the moment, the creature, massive and intimidating, its eyes locking onto the lens, that primal, intelligent gaze, and the slow, deliberate raise of its hand, a gesture that haunted him more than any violent lunge. It wasn't just a beast, it was something more, something aware. The final, violent swipe, the sudden blackness, the immediate crash, and his own cry. The footage was irrefutable. It was raw, terrifying, and utterly compelling. He wrestled with the decision. To release it meant shattering the veil of skepticism, inviting ridicule, and potentially danger. To withhold it felt like a betrayal of the truth, of the profound, terrifying reality he had just experienced. But the message felt too important, too vital to keep hidden. The world needed to know. The experience had irreversibly altered Alex. The thrill of urban exploration, once his sole drive, now seemed trivial. He had peered into the abyss and it had gazed back. He understood humility in the face of nature's formidable hidden power. He understood respect. The unknown wasn't just a concept. It was a living, breathing entity, a guardian of forgotten places, demanding reverence. If Alex's harrowing tale left you breathless, if the sheer audacity of his encounter sent shivers down your spine, then please, like this video. Share it with anyone who dares to question the known world, with those who believe there are still mysteries to uncover. And tell us in the comments below, what do you think the Bigfoot's intentions were? Was it territoriality, curiosity, or something more? Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life encounters and mysterious explorations. We're constantly pushing the boundaries, venturing into the unknown, just like Alex. Check out our next video for another expedition, another tale from the edges of our understanding. There's so much more out there, waiting to be discovered.